Welcome to the Lion-Faced Guru. This podcast is hosted by two fine gentlemen. My name is Kim, and next to me is Carl. And we will be doing a proper introduction and our own biographies later. But now we will just briefly introduce us. And never mind the broken English, it's going to be one of the main characteristics in this podcast. So, if I'll just start with myself, my name is Kim. I've been meditating for quite a while and have been teaching Dharma teachings for several years. I'm from Finland, and yeah, I think that's enough for now. Carl.
My name is Carl Henrik. I come from Norway originally, also live in Finland at the moment. I've also been meditating for some years, at first on and off for maybe 4 years, and then about 2 years ago it got serious. Yeah.
So, we've been talking before that both of us have wanted to do a podcast, a Dharma podcast, for a few years. Is there a reason why you have wanted to have a podcast, Carl?
Well, for me it's obvious that there is a lot of confusion on the spiritual scene. A lot of people are talking, but it seems that perhaps not a lot of people know exactly what they are talking about. And I think that we have something to contribute to that.
Right. For several years I've been following the scene of pragmatic Dharma, mostly found in Dharma Overground Forum, and in general for the last 15 years when I've been meditating, I've tried to make sense of things. So making sense of things to me is really the purpose of this podcast, and I think Carl can join me in saying that our podcast will be really closely related, if not the main purpose of this podcast is practice. So either it's closely related to practice or it's about practice, really. How do you do things? How do you get things done in your spiritual mind training path, right?
Yeah, and when I think of it, it's probably a bit controversial of me to say that other people don't know what they're talking about and we do. That's not exactly the intention behind it.
Right.
Yeah, it's more that I find a lot of vague things, and I understand it because we are talking about things that have to be experienced,
right?
And you have to put it. It takes some clarity of speech, to put it like that, to actually put this into words.
Right.
And this is more. And also directly towards practice instead of, like, for example, history.
Yeah.
The sociology part of Buddhism or Dharma.
Cultural.
Like yeah.
Yeah.
Which is, for me, not that. It's interesting in its own sense, but not the main point.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's a very common thing that in Dharma teachings, or spiritual teachings at large, there's a lot of discussion about other things than the practical things. How do you actually get awakened? How is the mind purified, and so on? So I think this is a very important point, that our podcast, The Lion-Faced Guru, is going to be about practice and how getting things done.
Yeah, in clear language.
Yeah. And from my and also from my behalf, I've been having a blog Open Heart blog for some years, and there's a lot of readers to that blog from all over the world, and there's a lot of people who have listened to my talks that are found from YouTube, and I've been quite critical in what I say, and I've been also mentioning names towards whom my criticism is aimed at, but I would just like to say for all our listeners to hear it that at least I've tried to express this criticism and the criticism coming in these podcast episodes as well in a constructive spirit. So it's not about when we will discuss critical points with Carl in this podcast, it's not because of finding fault in other people. It's about trying to clarify these matters for the benefit of everyone. So that's our motivation. So compassion is there.
Yeah, exactly. We're in this together after all. So.
Yeah. So in this first episode of the Lion-Faced Guru, we are going to talk about awakening from several perspectives. Awakening is called by different terms, and us two, Carl and I, being open heart practitioners and teachers, we have a distinctive definition to what awakening is, what it means, and what awakening, actually in your own experience means. So that is the topic of this first episode. But before going to the topic of the day, I already mentioned other resources like a blog that I'm having, Open Heart blog that is found at openheart.blogspot.com. There's a lot of material there, both my own thoughts and thoughts from on awakening by many other noted Dharma teachers, lamas, from different traditions. So I would recommend you to use that resource as well with listening to this podcast. So the first question about awakening obviously is, what is awakening?
What is awakening?
Yeah. It's a good question, and it gets asked a lot, not only from myself as I suppose a senior practitioner, but also from all spiritual and Dharma teachers. What would you answer to this, Carl?
Well, the way I see it, awakening is like when the central knot of the discontentment that we all feel as human beings sort of releases, or is it's the end of that central knot.
What do you mean by central knot?
I mean
knot as in K-N-O-T, knot.
Yes, as in knot. Yeah. Well, I mean the localized I feeling.
Right.
Like there is this idea that there is a solid I somewhere in the body, someone who experiences this or that. And when you investigate that and eventually see through it, see it as being essentially empty or illusory, something happens, something changes, and that is awakening.
Yeah, right. And how does this relate to, in Buddhism they talk about dukkha, which often is translated as suffering. I often use as confusion or discontentment. So, what happens to that suffering?
Well, it's drastically reduced.
Right.
At the point of awakening, this I that colors everything as good or bad really loses its grip on the experience,
Right. And if we look at this if we think of our daily lives, in the morning we wake up, and then we go to the toilet and wash our teeth and have breakfast and so on. Whatever you do, you go to work or school or hang out with people or whatever you do, we have reactions, right? We are happy of pleasant circumstances, and we don't like other things. There are things we like and things we don't like. So, and this is of course perfectly fine. It's normal. But the reason why it's problematic, the reason why this suffering, discontent, why it happens is because we have this sense of self, me, I, this entity somewhere in our bodies and minds, which is the cause why these likes and dislikes come. That is the cause where our thoughts and emotions where they can take hold of, right?
Yeah.
So like that's the main cause of attachment to circumstances, thoughts and ideas.
Yeah, and as long as that illusion is still intact, we constantly build to this.
Right.
That's the main purpose of living, is to seems to be building this kind of bigger ego, expanding it. Even in spirituality, before awakening, can often be seen as just building on to this.
Yeah.
And that's really problematic.
Yeah.
Because it leads to discontentment. Like,
yeah.
Essentially, that is what it is.
Yeah. And maybe just continuing that example that I just said, and this discontent, like we can actually experience that when this selfing happens, when this reacting through the sense of me-ness, I-ness happens, it actually drains our energy, and it makes us feel somehow, closed into a box. It doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel right or natural. So when this central knot of the self or me, when it is seen through and when it drops off, that is awakening. And it doesn't mean that we become blank-minded, like fools, something like this. It doesn't mean that. It just means that our experience, our sense of ourselves changes. There's a shift. We can still refer to me or I or you or them, but the meaning to ourselves is different. And by meaning, I'm not meaning that it's something else. It's rather that there is spaciousness. There is natural openness, release.
Yeah, you could call it a fundamental shift of paradigm.
Right.
In how you experience
right.
the world, the phenomenal world.
So that's I think that's actually a good definition of what awakening is. Carl, would you like to describe in detail and at length what happened to you when you awakened?
Yeah. Well, as I said, I had been looking for a way to awaken for many years. I had this experience where I realized that this contraction was not the whole story, like this I.
Right.
And after that, spent a lot of time trying to find a way to deal with it.
Right.
And I stumbled across, I think it was, late 2015. I stumbled across a post on a forum, discussion forum, that you had written with the title "Awakening is not an accident anymore."
Right. That's a catchy title.
Yeah, that was exactly what I was looking for at the time. Somebody who would say that.
Right.
And I clicked the link, read a little bit about it, and I realized that this is actually it. Even before starting, I had this intuitive feeling that this is valid, it's authentic. And I had never heard anything like that before.
Right.
So, started the guidance process using the two-part formula, which we will come back to later.
Yeah.
Started, I think, it was the beginning of January on a Monday. And started in the beginning, I wasn't really sure what I was looking for or doing. Just kept switching back and forth between these two modes.
Yeah.
And at one point I realized that there was actually muscular tension involved in keeping this self.
Right.
When I reaffirmed the self, I felt that my body actually tensed. And that was a kind of aha.
Right.
What are the implications of this?
Right.
Soon after, I had experienced this selfless mode, the vast openness, and this I mentioned I had experienced it before, but during this guidance process, I had the possibility to actually examine it, like to check out what is this,
right?
To really look, to feel into this spaciousness,
right?
And then kept on doing kept on processing, and by Friday, actually I smoked a joint, and
you did what?
And I at first I felt like, oh shit, I shouldn't have done that. Now I probably can't process properly. And then I thought, okay, never mind, just continue the process, just continue doing switching between the modes. And like almost immediately after I sat down that evening and started processing, at first I was drawn towards this feeling, this tingling sensation, this knot feeling, as in, behind my eyes.
Right.
And I had been noticing this for a few days, but it got really strong, like really obvious. Mm-hmm. So I naturally, my focus naturally went to this
yes,
focal point.
Yeah.
And there was a kind of, I have to describe it like an implosion. I felt that I was drawn, I became one-pointed in this knot behind the eyes. Mm-hmm. There was some energy going up my spine, mm-hmm. and then everything exploded back out again, and that was the end of that knot. There was just emptiness behind the eyes after that.
Right.
And also,
what do you mean by emptiness behind the eyes?
Spaciousness. There was like a spacious feeling that was in the place of where there formerly was something.
Right.
Or something I perceived as something.
Yes, something.
Yeah. Now there was no thing there anymore. Yes. And also this resulted in a complete, like when you say complete change, it's a subtle change. It was a subtle change at that point, but it was also really obvious at the same time.
Yeah.
Sort of the way I experienced all kinds of like for example, sounds felt very much closer to me. It was very natural to hear, to see things, colors. Everything was brighter. More contrast, more luminous. And it felt pretty great for quite some time after that. And eventually, of course, objects like emotions, they came back after this honeymoon period. But they never really felt, or they were never experienced the same way again. There was this spaciousness always after that.
And that was awakening.
That was awakening.
And I just want to underline something that you just said, that you said that there was this shift, this spaciousness opened up, this focal point behind the eyes disappeared, evaporated somehow, and there was this spaciousness instead. But at some point, thoughts and emotions started to come back again. So does it mean that was the spaciousness, is it permanent? Did something happen to that? Did the sense of self come back anymore? Did the central knot, has it come back ever since?
No, the central knot never came back after that.
Right.
There has been, of course, there are phases after that in how well you feel. Like generally, there are still cycles, but the main knot never came back.
Right. So what happened to you was irreversible.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Yeah, that's a wonderful story, Carl.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thanks, Kim.
Congratulations again.
And how about you then?
Well, I started to meditate when I was 24 years old. From the very day that I started practicing, I started sitting 8 hours every day. For the first 4 years, I practiced in Zen Buddhism. I also did training in Japan in a Zen temple, in a Rinzai Zen temple. Did a lot of meditation and received, of course, instruction from a Zen Buddhist master, who is a wonderful master, wonderful person, and it's a wonderful tradition. So I was in a temple, and then after some time, when I left the temple and came back to Finland, I still continued sitting 8 hours a day. But then a year later, something happened and I didn't feel good with the Zen style practices anymore. So after some time I figured this out. I found my way to tantric practices. And I started practicing tantric practices, and just like overnight, I changed my practices and was still practicing 8 hours a day. So for the first 8.5 years, I literally sat on my butt 8 hours every day. Never missed a day. So that's quite a bit of sitting. If I think about it now, physically I might be able to do it. I'm 38 now. I might be able to do it, but would I have to drive? I don't think so. But I was a young man with a lot of energy and enthusiasm, but also determination. In Zen Buddhism, this determination is something that you have to have.
Yeah.
Zen Buddhism in general is a school where sitting meditation is emphasized a lot. So they sit a lot, and I sat a lot. But nevertheless, practicing Zen Buddhism and then practicing tantric practices with a really wonderful teacher, still after 8.5 years, nothing happened that would be irreversible. There was no permanent shift. And I would spend a lot of time in thoughtless state, in different absorption states that are called jhanas in Theravada Buddhism. I didn't know about jhanas, but later when I heard about them, I figured out that I've spent a lot of time in formless jhanas specifically, and Pure Land jhanas. But after 8.5 years, nothing permanent had happened. And then my teacher already had passed away a year before, and a senior student, a Dharma sibling of mine, she, on behalf of my teacher who had passed away, gave me a initiation to this one specific mantra related to a specific deity. And I remember back in 2011 when this happened, for the most part my awakening took place in 1st of November in 2011. And I had divorced the year before and was living as a single man, and for the most part of that year my mind was thoughtless. Like that. No thought. Just silent. And I remember when I received the initiation and the mantra from my Dharma sibling, and the first time I sat down to say this mantra, I actually knew that already before I sat down that something would happen. And sure enough, I sat down and said the mantra a few times, and it felt like it was a session of 10 or 15 minutes of sitting. But when I stood up, hour and a half had gone by. And I noticed that something was different. Clearly something was different. My mind was still thoughtless, but it was somehow more profound. Somehow, it was just clear, and maybe I could say settled in a different way. So I realized that there was something that took place with the help of this mantra and this deity. Something was removed, something was taken out. And then I told about this to my Dharma sibling, and she confirmed that it was awakening. So that's how it happened to me. And as with Carl, this sense of self, sense of me-ness hasn't come back in the same way afterwards. So that's the story of my awakening. Maybe we should go on to the next matter, which is skepticism about awakening. Would you say something about that, Carl?
Yeah, I can do that. After awakening, of course, for me, I wanted to talk about it to people. I have friends who meditate and are seriously into spirituality, and I wanted to just sing out to them that I had found it. That was the feeling I had, and I did to some of them, and I thought that they would.
Of course you did.
I thought they would see it through my eyes, or see it as I had done, as valid immediately. But that was not the case with all of the people I talked to. A lot of them seemed to be very skeptical, to the point where they actually just seemed to close their eyes and ears when I talked about it. So I tried in vain to kind of make them believe that this was it, and learned a lot of lessons there. So I thought about this. Why are people so skeptical? Because I thought that spirituality was about awakening. Meditation was about awakening, or at least that's like an essential part of it. But still, this skepticism. And what I figured out, some of the explanations that came to mind, was that people have very high expectations of what it means to be awakened.
Right.
They have read the books.
Yes.
They have listened to other people speak about it. Famous people speak about it. People with a lot of charisma speak about it.
Ouch.
They have no chance there. And made up their minds as to what awakening is and how it looks like. Like how an awakened person is supposed to act, speak. And it's very hard to actually to convey to people that might not be the case. Because the skepticism comes into picture there as a kind of defense mechanism, because this awakening has been put up so high, viewed so highly. It's hard to argue with all the books as well.
And this is like awakening is becoming mainstream. It's becoming mainstream, folks. So I didn't know 10 years ago, but now I know maybe at least 100 people who are awakened, who have had this same experience, same shift. So I didn't know them 10 years ago. And if we look at the Dharma culture or spiritual culture 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, it was so different. If you would read about awakening from a book, it would, just like Carl said, it would be probably vague, something, way too general, or it would be explained as something that is just really extraordinary. Well, of course, here we shouldn't mix views from different schools of spirituality. Everybody is free to have their own definition, but here we are mainly talking about the Buddhist perspective of the shift that we are calling with the term awakening. And for example, in Zen Buddhism, it's called Kensho, seeing to one's true nature. So like in the previous decades, when you heard about awakening or read about awakening, you probably couldn't get specific detailed information or instructions about it. So that doesn't help much. But now the Dharma culture is quite different already in 10-20 years, that the so-called pragmatic ways of Dharma practice, pragmatic views to Dharma practice are becoming more and more general. And sometimes, for the better or worse, they are taken out from the larger context of the Buddhist Dharma, Buddhist teachings, for better or worse, right? But that's good that awakenings happen, whether in a traditional setting or unorthodox setting. Did you have something else to say about skepticism?
No.
Okay, so we tried to define what awakening is, but how about what awakening is not?
We have already mentioned that there is a permanency, there's this permanent aspect of awakening.
Right.
That means that it's not temporary. So we have a lot of different temporary experiences that one can have while meditating or in everyday life. We have energetic movements that can feel very extraordinary. We have temporary flashes of insight, like wow, that's the way it is. And we also have moments of, as you said, thoughtlessness,
right,
stillness,
right,
that can be very beautiful. They are authentic experiences,
right,
but they are not awakening, because awakening is a permanent thing, in better of a permanent
something is clearly different than before, and you don't have to question about it. You cannot doubt about it, because or actually you can, but in context of this question, there is this sense of permanence to it. And maybe I should just say something about, because as I was telling you, I did a lot of sitting meditation for over 8 years before I got awakened, and had a lot of experiences. So like bright lights, very fine visions to different worlds, seeing a lot of exalted visions, meeting teachers, masters, beings from different planes. What else? Sensations of energy movement or energetic openings, thoughtlessness, like really impressive thoughtlessness. By impressive, I mean that if you normally have a lot of thoughts, and when all these thoughts all of a sudden, when are not there, it's pretty impressive in the beginning. So, but none of these are awakening as we have or are defining it here. So, with meditation and shamatha meditation, you can, or just, shamatha meditation means relaxing and making the mind one-pointed. So, through concentration practices, mindfulness practices, you can settle down and feel this clear-minded stillness, clear-minded openness. But that's just a temporary state. If you don't have the insight, if you don't actually see that the sense of meanness or the one who experiences things, you have to see that it's a hoax. That it's a phantom.
But then again, as we have said, it's not temporary, but it is not the end of the road either.
Yeah.
It is not the full potential of spirituality.
Yes.
Not Buddhahood in Buddhism.
Yeah.
And this is also a very important point, because this goes also directly to the skepticism that I mentioned, that people expect you to be a Buddha once you're awakened. Your enlightenment with big capital E.
Yeah.
And it's not.
Yeah.
There are still a lot of other objects of awareness. We will, maybe we can just talk about it now.
I still have something to say. So as you were saying that awakening is the first thing, but not the last thing.
Yeah.
Not even close. So it can be compared to, I just had this like an analogy come to my mind, that if you have a big sandwich, like a good tasty sandwich with mayonnaise and tomato and salad and cheese and whatever you can have there, oils and sauces, that's like the big sandwich of enlightenment with big E. That's the full Buddhahood, this sandwich. But awakening is just the first bite of the sandwich.
Yeah.
The first bite in the corner, so that you actually taste, you have a piece of sandwich in your mouth, you taste it, you taste all these different ingredients, and your belly gets filled to a small degree through eating it.
Yeah, and that's quite a big leap from not having tasted anything, right?
Exactly, precisely. And perhaps I should say something. I worked with a lot of people, helped and guided a lot of people to get awakened through the last few years. And some people have mentioned this Kundalini thing to me in relation to awakening, which is something that I also experienced with my own awakening and what my teacher also experienced with hers. So, when this awakening happens, some people who know to observe it, they have this experience that this coiled energy near the pelvic floor rises up the spine, goes through the crown, high above the head, and from there it descends down to the head and to the heart space, to the level of the heart where it dissolves. So there is this up and down movement of Kundalini energy. And this is what I also experienced, and it only lasted for 1 or 2 seconds maybe. This movement up and down to the heart and from there dissolving. So it happened very fast, but I just wanted to mention that I've seen some Dharma teachers mentioning this Kundalini rising, coming back down, and dissolving as a indication of awakening. So I just wanted to mention this as well. Some people, as I mentioned, have noticed the same thing happening to them when they have worked with me or when I worked with them.
Yeah, but on the other hand, a lot of people don't notice it, and even
Yeah.
like people can awake during sleep, and of course,
Yeah.
won't notice it then.
Yeah, yes. So you were already going to the next topic of distinction between subject self and object self.
Yes.
What does that mean? Subject self and object self.
Yeah, because we have been talking about that awakening revolves around the I, the feeling of an I, the
I-ness.
central knot.
Yes?
And this would then be called the subject self. It is the subject of the I who is experiencing different objects.
Yeah.
But it's not, as we've also said that it's the I is the root of dukkha, or discontentment, suffering. But there are also other sources of it, or how would you say it? Like if it's the root, there you can still suffer after awakening. There is still discontentment after awakening, because we still make selves in objects, or there are still residual selves contained within objects.
Numerous.
Yes.
Yes.
Like thoughts, emotions, also external things that we consider to be mine, my car, for example.
Yeah.
So this would be different object selves. Yeah, and it's like I am angry. You have anger as an object, identify with that object, and you have made another self.
Yeah.
And these, of course, have to be dealt with separately. Or, I mean, after awakening.
Yeah. I usually I talk about awakening related to the subject self and mind purification related to object selves that come in numerous different forms, thoughts, emotions, and various subtle energies. And one way that I often compare this complex whole of selfing, which really is our mind, equals our mind, is a cartwheel. So if we think about a cartwheel, it has the center part, then we have the center part, there are spokes coming out of it, and it connects with the outer rim. So if we consider a cartwheel like this way, awakening and subject self would be the center part of this cartwheel. And if we think about a cartwheel that is in movement, when you take the center out, this cartwheel will automatically collapse. You know, it cannot hold weight in the same way as before. So this metaphor, it nicely explains the importance of awakening. You know, if you want to make the cartwheel collapse, you can try to take the spokes, the middle spokes, out from there. But still, it's tricky in that situation to get the cartwheel to collapse if you still have the center part. So, like my own experience was that my mind was already to some extent purified, clarified before awakening, but awakening doesn't have to wait. You know, you don't have to wait or prepare a lot to be ready for do some awakening processing. You know, there is no requirement like that. Maybe we will continue that a little later. And next we will talk about what kind of techniques are there for getting awakened. So there are a great variety of techniques in different traditions, not only Buddhism, that are specifically meant to generate awakening. And usually in the traditional sense, awakening is something, you know, like a first step or a beginning, or in citation marks, in the side of a greater awakening or greater enlightenment. So these techniques in Buddhism, they talk about vipassana. Vipassana means like seeing with clarity or supreme seeing. Vipassana is practiced widely in Theravada Buddhism and Mahayana Buddhism, also in Vajrayana. In Zen Buddhism, they have koans, these riddles of nonsense that you cannot answer through logical reasoning. I don't actually know what techniques, if there are like specific techniques for awakening in Pure Land Buddhism, but they do know about awakening in Pure Land Buddhism with the term Shinjin. And of course in Hinduism, in Advaita schools, there are famous 20th century Advaita teachers like Ramana Maharishi, Nisargadatta, and their descendants who have taught self-inquiry, Atma Vichara. And also in Dzogchen, in Tibetan Dzogchen, I've heard that there are techniques specifically for awakening, techniques that are similar to self-inquiry. And actually I've written about this in Open Heart blog, so you can find some more material from there. One thing that, and this is again, I'm talking from my own experience and from my own view, but it seems like all these many techniques that are available and taught, that they really don't work in a mechanical and certain way. So it's more or less like an accident whether awakening happens to you or not. Or in some cases, people need to apply these techniques of self-inquiry or Zen koans or vipassana before awakening takes place. So one of my main concerns has been that how is this possible? Why is it that getting awakened, even with techniques, seems to be a bit like a lottery? You know, at some point I started feeling that there should be a mechanism to it. Even though we are talking about the organic human being or organic human body-mind, there should be because there is a cause for delusion, the sense of self, there should be a clear cause for liberation of that sense of self.
Yeah.
This is just a logical train of thought.
Yeah, and it's the same cause in everyone. So
yes,
why not
precisely
a method that addresses this cause directly?
Precisely. So I've thought about this quite a bit and did this next categorization of the reasons why all these techniques that work fine for some but don't work for others. I did a categorization of this, and this can be found from the Open Heart blog, also in the text relating to Ramana Maharishi and Nisargadatta, and also there's a text on Chinese Chan master Sheng Yen, which is related to this matter. So my categorization has 4 parts, and I will just read them to you. 1. The teacher doesn't understand what awakening is or how it happens, even if she or he is awakened himself or herself. 2. He or she has no clarity and enough skillfulness in his ways to convey it through exact verbal descriptions. 3. The particular techniques aimed to generate awakening might be altogether irrelevant or only vaguely relevant. And 4. Not enough one-on-one attention between teacher and student. So I think these 4 points are actually cover a lot. I've seen it many times that even though a teacher or a guide or a person giving a talk or a satsang is clearly awakened, that he or she doesn't really know what happened to him or her, cannot put their finger on the very thing that happened with awakening, and for this reason cannot really convey it to the people around them and cannot give specific instructions, specific techniques. This is quite common, I would say. And then the third point of particular techniques aimed to generate awakening might be altogether irrelevant or only vaguely relevant. This is also I think a big problem, because it does happen that to some awakening happens through these techniques, traditional techniques, while to many others it doesn't. I just recently got to know a person who has practiced Buddhist Vipassana practice and meditation for 18 years, joining retreats regularly and meeting with the teacher, but wasn't awakened. Although the teacher was awakened and was talking about it all the time, but it was like a textbook case of this problem. This person, he had hoped, of course, to get awakened himself, but the techniques weren't right. The teaching was missing something, so it was a problem. Nothing happened. And the fourth point of not getting enough attention, I think this is a problem in some spiritual gatherings, events. There are so many people, like dozens and dozens or hundreds or even thousands of people, and the teacher is in the front on the podium giving instructions, but they aren't specific enough for everyone. So that's that can be a problem as well. Did you have something to say?
Yeah, I just heard about I saw a YouTube video of a satsang and where a person got to place their question and open the question by saying that for 6 meetings she had put her hand up every time, but she just hoping that she would get the possibility to actually get her question answered. And this is it's problematic. Then you have too many students.
Yeah. And especially if it's 6 meetings, not in your own hometown, but if you have to travel on the other side of the world 6 times and spend a whole lot of money and time to get that one question answered, it's not a ideal situation.
No.
So I have a few examples of late awakening which I gathered, and with late awakening I mean people who were practitioners or heavily involved with spiritual Dharma practice but got awakened very late, considering their position and effort. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the 14th Dalai Lama, the famous leader of the Tibetans in exile and head of the Gelug school of Tibetan Buddhism, he has talked about this in his own words, and this can also be found from the Open Heart blog under the title Dalai Lama Speaks of His Awakening, where he says that he got awakened at the age of 35. 35, Dalai Lama. First of all, I appreciate him a lot, both as a teacher in general, but it's quite a thing to hear him say that himself, that it took so long for him to get awakened.
Yeah, because this is a guy who has been raised in a tradition.
Right.
It's not like he came there as a 20-year-old or as a 30-year-old, but as recognized from really an early age.
Yeah. At 35, I think he was 2 or 3 years old when he was taken to the monastery. So he had been around Dharma teachings for over 30 years at 35 years of age. And clearly from his own description that can be found from the blog text and also from his book, you can directly see that what he means with this shift, with this awakening, is exactly the same as what we have been talking about. So that's a late awakening, a good example of that. Another one that I thought about was a very famous Japanese Zen master who lived in the 20th century called Omori Sogen. Omori Sogen Roshi. Roshi means like a senior Zen master. And he was actually the master of my Zen calligraphy master. And Omori Sogen Roshi, he practiced Zen for 8 years and sat 4 hours every day and joined week-long retreats every month for 8 years before he got awakened. And as I mentioned before, of course the previous practice before awakening, it's not wasted. Of course there's use for it, but his awakening as well was a late awakening. Then the third example of this is the name changed Jean-Pierre, a Frenchman who contacted me about 3 years ago, who had practiced meditation actively and intensively for over 30 years, mostly in like Hindu style teachings, and he had also been a monk or a renunciate in the TM movement for 12 years. But even after 30 years of dedication and practice, he wasn't awakened, and he emailed me. He met my Dharma brother in India, and they had some exchange, and afterwards when he got back to France, he emailed me and asked if I could help him, and thought about it, how I would try to help him to get awakened, and figured out this, what we now call the 2-part formula. And after 4 days of dialogue, Jean-Pierre got awakened. So that's another example of late awakening. And the fourth example is, of course, myself. 8.5 years of quite dedicated practice, Zen Buddhism, Tantric practices, and 8.5 years, folks. So that's quite a bit.
How old were you then?
When I woke up?
Yes.
2011, so that was 6 years ago. 32, I think. Yeah, I was 32. One thing that we already mentioned before, or you can kind of start to gather it from what we've been talking, and if you've been studying the matter of awakening yourself, reading books, meeting teachers and watching videos, you start to get the sense that this happens not only to Buddhists, but it happens to all kinds of people.
Yeah, it's a universal thing for mankind to be
Yeah.
able to have this
Yeah,
awakening experience happen.
yeah. I haven't really studied any Christianity, but like in Christianity, as in Islam, they have like these contemplative schools, traditions. Without having studied any of them or having met anyone there, I'm pretty certain that they know what we have been talking about. And some people, maybe I should say some Buddhists, they get the hairs in the back of their neck stood up when the fact that awakening or Kensho or Shinjin or what happened to the Shakyamuni Buddha 2,500 years ago under the Bodhi tree, that it's universal. That it doesn't matter if you're a Buddhist or not. Some people don't like to hear that, unfortunately. But it does happen to people. And it does happen to people not only through spiritual processing using some technique, but it happens to people spontaneously as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've known a few people, or have met a few people who have awakened spontaneously. I've also met a few people who have never had the sense of self. They have thoughts and emotions, object selves, but they never had subject self. They just never had it. Like adult people in their 30s, 40s and 50s. So that's also something to think about and consider. Maybe we should talk a little bit about, we've been referring to, and I don't want this to sound like we'd be marketing anything or anything like that, but we've been referring to the so-called two-part formula. Carl was mentioning this in his narration of his own awakening story, and I've mentioned it a couple of times. I'm reading this manuscript of ours from my laptop, and it says the two-part formula, or 2PF, the new black of awakening. Would you like to say something about this in general, about the two-part formula?
Well, I can talk about the two different steps. There are two parts to the formula. The first one is the I-less mode, the spaciousness that we have been talking about.
Yeah.
And so it's just basically relaxing all tension. And by that...
Or relaxing as much tension as possible.
Of course. All tension is a bit of a high...
it's too hard.
But enough to get a sense of this spaciousness and have this drop-off. And now I'm also talking about like temporary experiencing this I-less mode.
Yes.
And experiencing it, feeling that there is actually no I. Before moving on to the second part, which is to reaffirm the I. You can say I, or me, or mine, or whatever makes you really feel this contraction. And then investigate it, and that's important. Try to see, where is this I feeling? What arises, and where is it located? These arising phenomena. And by switching between them,
between the two modes,
you sort of generate like a momentum to, or it deepens in both ways. So the contrast makes it very clear. This I, it becomes clearer. The I-less modes becomes clearer, and then at one point, awakening happens.
The two modes, the two parts, two-part formula. I just mentioned that this Frenchman, when he emailed me about 3 years ago and asked my help to help him to have an awakening, an irreversible shift, I sat down and thought about it, and this two-part formula just popped into my head. So the two parts, just like Carl explained, has one, the I-less mode, and two, the I-based mode. And you just learn these two modes, see how they feel, and experience how they feel in your body, in your mind, and you just keep comparing them. Keep switching between the two modes, and eventually, as the statistics say, this shift happens. It's simple as that. And you can find these instructions for free, guided audio practice for free from the website and YouTube. So feel free to check if you want. But as I mentioned statistics, during the first 3 years that this two-part formula has been used, up until now, 83 people out of 85 have awakened through using it. 83 people out of 85, which means that 98% of people who tried and studied it got awakened according to the traditional standards. Was there something you wanted to say?
Yeah, that's a quite extraordinary number. But I think the strength that comes, or the strength of the two-part formula lies in the fact that this is the mechanism behind all awakenings, regardless of whether you actually apply this formula in the open heart context or as formulated here.
Precisely, and that was what I meant to say when I meant that this is not meant as a marketing. This formula came to me 3 years ago, and we just started using it, first with this Jean-Pierre, and then I told about it to others, that what had happened through using this simple technique, And other people started to ask me for this guidance, and first friends and open heart practitioners or people who I know, not all of them at all are open heart practitioners, but it just kept going from the word, kept going from people to people. And these 83 people who have awakened through using it, they are all kinds of people. People from all over the world, not Antarctica, but from other continents, from different cultures, different ages, from young to old retired people, from people who don't have education to people who have high academic education. So really like the whole scope of human beings.
Yeah, and people who have practiced for 30 years.
Yeah.
And people who haven't practiced before at all.
Yes, that is an important point. Let me think if like there have been people who have practiced for 30 years, 20 years, 10 years of different practices, Buddhist practices, Hindu practices, Taoist practices, Christian practices, and then there are people who don't believe to any gods, who are scientifically orientated, and people who really have no practice experience at all. And it still works. So I think we're on to something.
Yeah.
I think this technique is right at the core of the mechanism.
Yeah, and to elaborate a bit more on that it's not a promotion of or like a commercial. As you have mentioned many times, the vision or the hope is that other traditions actually will make use of this.
Yes.
On their own.
Yes.
Regardless of open heart as a tradition.
Yes.
Because it is so concrete. It's so on point at the crux of the matter, to put it like that.
Yes, that is exactly right. When I've talked about the two-part formula and awakenings generated by it, I've met with a lot of resistance and a lot of, I would even say, hatred. Not only skepticism, but cynicism and hatred by people who are practitioners and have been long-time practitioners. What I can say is that you can, if you want, if you don't want, you don't have to, and you don't need to. But if you want, you can just look into the materials and try it on your own.
There's also a guided practice on YouTube.
Yeah.
Here is how to get awakened, guided practice, which can be done at home for free.
Yeah.
Check it out. It's like, this amazes me that people are not willing to check out things on their own. They let these preconceptions completely blind them, and they'd rather throw a tantrum instead of actually just looking at things.
Yeah.
They're there. The information is there. So why not?
What I always say as a pragmatic Dharma practitioner, I always say that if there was something that worked, like we're talking about awakening now, that if there was something that worked even better, I would instantly throw away the two-part formula. But I haven't found such a way. And by the way, like as was mentioned in this podcast before, and as you can find info from the Open Heart blog, there are many references to what awakening is. And it can be defined what it is and what happens with awakening. But the closest comparison to the two-part formula that I've found is from Daniel Brown, who is a American Mahamudra and Dzogchen teacher, who in his emptiness meditation instruction gave partially identical, partially very similar instruction. And you can also find his direct quote from Open Heart blog. Just by searching the blog with Daniel Brown, you can find it.
If I remember correctly, also Richard Miller, who is a psychologist specializing on yoga nidra, or like this yogic relaxation technique. He also has some similar stuff where you contract, study the contraction, expand, study the expansion.
Nice.
So it's not an exclusive. It's not like there's nobody who owns this.
Yeah. So I've met with a lot of resistance and cynicism with me spreading the news about this technique. But I've also met with a lot of relief and gratitude, and 83 people have awakened through using it, and every time it happens to someone that I'm working with, it's a thrill. It's really wonderful. Whether they have a practice background or not, it's really nice to be in this position as a teacher and a guide. Just recently, a student who has almost 20 years of Buddhist meditation history, didn't get awakened. This is the same person who I was talking a few moments ago. We did dialogue with him, and after 2 weeks of processing, he got awakened. And as a comment, he said, with the history of almost 20 years of Buddhist meditation, that, quote, "In terms of Buddhism in general, this really is groundbreaking stuff." And it warms my heart. So, as Carl mentioned, it's also my wish and hope that all kinds of people, whether they are following some teacher and some lineage, some specific school of Buddhism or Hinduism or whatever, that they will start using this formula. Just try it out and then start using it. And personally, I would be glad to help if somebody needs help with it, and if other teachers and sanghas would like to start using it. Something else, Carl?
I think we have pretty much covered what we wanted to talk about. There is more information online.
Yeah.
If we have not covered everything.
Yeah.
Groundbreaking stuff.
Groundbreaking stuff. But this has been the first episode of The Lion-Faced Guru, the podcast on awakening. And in the following episodes, we'll be talking about the central matters of meditation, Dharma practice, Buddhism, Dzogchen, all these things. We hope that you enjoyed this episode, that it's of some benefit to you and to all beings. Thank you from my behalf, and goodbye.
Goodbye.